Well, she pays. That's fine.
Guess if you come get my car, you have to go over that.
Yeah.
Jackie says she's a user.
Neither is actually the same stuff.
That I believe. It is 6:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We do have Dottie Riley here from Tuck Rock, and someone that looks vaguely familiar from Springstead, Brian Kidney. So we're going to move you guys up on the agenda if that's okay. So you can get out and watch the Royals game or whatever. So
Well, that was a low blow, Mayor.
Someone had 2 hits tonight.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, I'm in the air conditioning.
That's true.
Staff, one of the things that Springstead routinely does is monitor our outstanding debt for an opportunity to refinance for interest cost savings or other reasons, but generally for that. And the City Hall lease revenue bonds have been on our radar for a while, and it's a good time to do it. It's a really good savings, and because there's a public building commission involved in this process, it's got an extra step or two in it that council is not familiar with, and so I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask Dottie and Brian tonight to come while you had time to ask questions in case there were any. Dottie can go through the process and Brian can go through the savings, but it's specifically for savings. So.
Yeah, I can start here, and I'm sure Dottie will stop me if I start saying something that's not correct. The history of that. So yeah, as your finance director had said, that we do look through your outstanding debt to make sure there's any refinancing opportunities, and this has been on our radar for some time. The 2002 Public Building Commission lease revenue bonds were issued, obviously, for the public building here, the council meeting, or the City Hall. It was issued in 2002. There was a 10-year call on them, which means that coming up in November of 2012, just 10 years later, you have the opportunity to issue new debt and take the funds of the new debt and pay off the old debt. And looking at the current interest rates, the outstanding bonds have an outstanding average interest rate of 4.6%. We believe that the new bonds would have an average interest rate of 1.8, and these are rough numbers. Of course, they're subject to market movement. I have to make sure I say that. So as you can see, there's a pretty good spread between what we believe we can issue the debt currently versus what we could issue the debt, or what was issued the debt back in 2002. And, you know, we run the numbers. There's currently $3,160,000 outstanding. They were issued at $4 million, 3.16 outstanding. And we believe if we refinance that, including the fees involved, you would have a future value savings of $402,000, a present value savings of $369,000. Roughly, cash flow wise, it'd be an average savings of around $44,000 a year. And we use a present value percentage of refunded debt, just kind of a benchmark to make sure that, you know, we're not refinancing debt that costs too much to refinance. The rule of thumb is basically 3% of the debt service over the refunded debt. I know it's kind of an industry standard, but just to give a benchmark there, 3% is the kind of the bottom line. 9.7% is what we're looking at on these bonds. So it is a very significant savings for you. Laura did mention that it was issued as a lease revenue bond through Public Building Commission. That's a mechanism that was used back in 2002. In order to refinance in 2012, you'll have to use the same method, and that is forming you have a public building commission, but to dust it off and have them meet as a public building commission, and there's an actual lease between the city and the public building commission, and that allows the bonds to trade just like a general obligation debt. So it's an irrevocable lease between the city and the public building commission. And that was a structure that was set up then. So the choice is reissue it as a public building commission or don't refinance the bond. So that's kind of where we are at this point. I think I could just open up for any question you might have refinancing.
Brian, you might also indicate that it is subject to the approval of the council after the public building.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'd mentioned the irrevocable lease between the city and the Public Building Commission. Basically, the city has to approve this. Even though the commission will take the bids, it has to be approved by the city council in order to technically accept the bids and technically issue the bonds, because the only way that the bonds will be repaid is the city will pay the Public Building Commission, which in turn pays off the bonds.
So maybe, I thought I'd have Dottie go through, there's an extra step, there's an extra resolution, there's an extra step.
Good evening. The public building commissions are a pretty common financing vehicle in the state of Kansas. Gardner's PBC was formed back in 1999, so it's been around for a long time, although I think it's only been used, I think, in conjunction with this facility and parking and related things to this facility. As Brian was indicating and as Laura has mentioned, really every time the Public Building Commission takes a step, the city will also need to take a step. So the first action would be for independently both the PBC and the city really to authorize all of us, staff, your consultants, to proceed with the sale of the revenue bonds. We typically, on a refunding issue, would incorporate into that authorizing step that the sale was conditioned on receiving not less than the 3% present value savings that Brian had mentioned, because that way we have some direction from you as to what threshold has to be met before we should move forward with the process in case the market would change or bids would come in at a level that we weren't expecting. The rest of the process is fairly similar to what you have for the city's own general obligation bonds. These are going to be sold through a public sale process, assuming you authorize everyone to proceed. When bids are received, those bids will come back both to the PBC and to the city. The PBC will have to actually authorize the issuance of the bonds, but that authorization will be conditioned on the city approving a lease agreement to provide the source of payment to repay the bonds. So if you have any questions on the PBC process, I'd be happy to answer them.
This is going to be on the July 2nd council agenda. We'll be running the resolution for the PBC to take action to authorize the sale, and also for the city council to agree the PBC is authorizing the sale. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Does the PBC have to meet between now and then?
6:45, right before the meeting.
Right before, okay.
And who's on the PBC?
By ordinance, the ordinance that created the PBC, there are 5 board members on the PBC. It's the mayor, the president, the vice president, the city administrator, and the finance director.
And why would we choose any other vehicle other than a lease revenue bond? Is there an advantage to, I mean,
Well, at this point,
you can't,
because we're dealing with bonds that are already outstanding, the vehicle available to you is to do PBC lease revenue bonds.
so there's no other choice?
There's no other reasonable choice.
The interest rate, with it being 1.8%, the projecting 1.8%. Now, is that just a matter of money being cheap right now, or is that a combination of the money being cheap and the good faith and credit of the city of Gardner?
Yeah, actually a little bit of both. It's really a mechanism of supply and demand right now in the market. There's just a lot of refinancings going on right now in the country. And so as people are refinancing, they're paying off old bonds. Those bond holders that just got paid off, they have a lot of cash on hand. Well, the reason they were invested in public or in GO, good, safe, because they wanted to be in there. And so they're turning around and wanting to buy new bonds that are coming out. And so there's a large supply. Take into account also, everyone's leaving Europe markets in order to, the whole flight to safety thing that we like to talk about. Kansas debt is very safe. It's conservative budgeting, and even, a AA3 rating that you do have is a very attractive rate. So it is a combination of both of those.
So were these 20-year bonds originally?
Yes.
So we'd be going out another 10 years beyond?
No, you didn't change the term, did you?
Yeah, we did not change the term. They'll come due in
2022.
2021. Actually, there's 9 years left after this year.
And what about the lease terms? Will they go down since there's a savings?
Dottie can answer that, but
I think
it's one for one, basically.
Yeah, the lease payments are going to parallel the bond. So they'll be exactly the same. Whatever principal and interest amount is due on the bond will be rent due on the lease.
So yes, it would go down.
So yeah, they'll go down?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're saving $44,000 a year roughly.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
And this is, we'd be approving this on the 2nd of July?
On July 2nd.
And
the
we would be
people
selling the bonds when?
You'll be August 6th,
Yeah, currently the calendar's set for August 6th.
but you'll have this step to approve the sale, July 2nd, and 6:45 for those of us who are on the PBC board.
Does the budget already include the $44,000
Yeah.
a year savings?
It does not include the savings, and that's in the bond and interest fund. Because at the time, I didn't know what it was, so no, it does not. So that's good. I mean, it's money in there that we weren't counting on.
Just another question. Would we have gotten such a good interest rate if we were rated lower than AA3?
The rate that we have plugged in here is based on a AA3 rating. I believe just
I'm
speculate.
just talking abstract.
Abstract, no, you would not have. If it was an A-rated, we're looking at the spread probably between 10 and 20 basis points between A-rated and AA. So the fact that you have a AA3 is giving you another, hopefully, depending on the market, 20 basis points or so at least.
Okay.
And so how much are the fees that are charged by Kutak Rock and Springstead for this?
I haven't even
I haven't
calculated it already yet. So would we provide that information in the city? I don't know.
Yeah, so but the fee is included in the savings.
Right. And the resolution, I was talking about a minimum present value savings. We create that as minimum net present value savings. So the savings would be net of any costs associated with doing the transaction.
Well, this sounds like a good deal then, huh?
3% is the minimum, and Brian estimates 977 or something like that? I mean, that's an estimate, but that's plenty of clearance to still make it worth it.
And if they don't come in, we don't.
Yeah, again, we'll monitor the market up to the point of selling. If it doesn't meet the 3, even if it's above 3%, if we still don't think it's a good deal, we'll definitely advise that way, but we would anticipate that this would continue to move forward.
So Laura, that means we go from basically a $58,000 shortfall in bond and interest to a $14,000 one?
Starting in 2013? 13.
But I guess I want to emphasize, I know Brian has said it, and I know they've done conservative estimates, but everything's dependent on the market on that.
Right.
So it's not money in the bank yet, It'll depend on what the market is on that particular day, so.
Right. The assumption is we should budget assuming that we're continuing with what we have.
Right.
And that, in August, if we
Right.
get it, then we can adjust at
That's
that
right.
point.
Now, you budget based on the debt service schedule we have today.
Very good. That's always good news.
Yeah, hopefully grease won't ruin everything.
They make it better.
Yeah, they make it better.
Drive it along.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, all right.
Just want to make sure everybody's
Very
got that
good.
6:45 July 2nd down.
6:45, July 6th. All right. We ready to get started then?
Were we gonna do questions from?
Oh, yeah, open
Last
from
week.
last time.
Yeah.
Did anybody submit any? I did not.
I didn't submit a particular question, but I do kind of have a discussion item. And Mayor, I know you and Mr. Press got copies of that, but I'm looking at the general fund multi-year forecast, and I'm hoping that somebody can make me feel better about this.
Let me try.
There you go.
Okay.
The rating agencies really don't look out past the current and subsequent budget year. There's very little concern about those out years on what those fund balances look like right now. Minor changes in our assessed value, our tax receipts from sales and other taxes, any development, any quick trip, anything that comes in changes that whole scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You just got some good news tonight about a change that was, a little bit anticipated, but somewhat unexpected. Things like that happen, and my belief is that those fund balances in the out years will improve depending upon the broadening of the tax base as we go forward. I think that it wouldn't take too much in the way of new development, a new shop, store, something, gas station, that would alter those revenue projections and put us in better shape. But we right now don't have a tremendous amount of concern about those out years. Now, you know that we have a shortfall between revenue expense and the general fund that we have balanced using reserves,
Yes.
which then puts the reserve, I think, for 13 at 29%. That's healthy.
Yes.
That's what reserves are for.
Mm-hmm.
During the leaner years that we have gone through, and hopefully it's turning the corner, 29% is a pretty healthy fund balance to have in the general fund for that particular year. So obviously we don't have any concerns currently with that. And again, as things evolve and as the community evolves and develops, we think those fund balances are going to improve. If it doesn't, if the unlikely scenario that we have no new businesses, no new residents, no growth in the assessed value or in the sales tax and other tax receipts, we always have that opportunity to go back and look at the expenditure side and make adjustments there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that as the council and governing body deem fit. But we really don't harbor a lot of concern about those out years, nor do the rating agencies really care what numbers we show in those out years. They're talking about 12 and 13, and they see that we're very healthy in that regard at this point in time. So I would say that while those numbers certainly should cause you to ask questions and to make note of that. That's why it's done that way, is so you can be aware that that potentiality is out there if nothing else changes. And then we will have to make other adjustments. Obviously, raising revenue is one, cutting expenditures, or both, is the way to do that. So we have that opportunity. But keep in mind that a lot of, some of the money in the general fund that's created the deficit has been to offset sales tax revenue that didn't come in at the proper levels that were anticipated when bonds were issued for parks and things of that nature. When you get those park impact fees when businesses come in, that changes that scenario pretty dramatically. And that goes off, then you've already got that savings. It goes back to bond and interest fund, and we don't have to worry about transferring out of the general fund to cover some of those costs. So there are a lot of components in play, and it's hard to say where that one's going to be, and that one's going to be, and that one's going to be at some future point in time beyond 2013. But with the way things are looking and with the way we're starting to get inquiry more and more from businesses and others who are looking at Gardner as a place to either move or to open their business, I think that even with a conservative, and I'm telling you that the budget estimates that we provide you, the revenue estimates in particular, are very, very conservative. So we are actually below certain projections that were provided to us by the county and by others, simply because we don't have the comfort level and the track record to be able to tell you unequivocally that that's going to happen. Given that that's pretty conservative, if those projections from the county and others do come in as they have projected, then we've erased a big part of that issue already. And that's without any new business, without any new residents, without any new building. So given those factors, that Laura and I particularly have a pretty good comfort level going forward that we're going to be okay, and we're going to be able to have general fund balances in the very healthy range in those out years.
As Chris pointed out, the shortfall is most of the, well, Mike pointed it out too, but most of the shortfall in 2014 and 15 is for debt service. And I mentioned when we were covering bond and interest the other night, and Mike just touched on it, that right now we just picked up $44,000 a year that was not included because it was not in my hand. And the same goes for any recovery of delinquent special assessments, and there is some significant activity on that right now. If that comes in, this goes away. We don't have to use this money then in the general fund. So we're still 2 years out, but I think we're going to see some big changes in the bond and interest fund as much as anything else too, and that takes care of this.
So Laura, I guess I have one question that I have is if we look at the outlying years, so 17% is pretty concerning for 2015, and I understand that that's an estimate based on what you know now. But at what point, so for instance, next year, I mean, at what point is a flag raised that says, our 2013 projections are off negatively, and this number is either we're on track at the 17% potentially, or it could be lower. That's the part that I'm not sure, how do we reconcile that?
Staff never stops monitoring.
So you would come to
I will come to
say,
you
Absolutely.
before this gets to that point and say, holy cow, something's right, or good news, something's good. And at the end of the year, when we start the audit process again for 2012, we'll do a true-up, and we'll know we only have a few months of sales tax in right now because it's a 2-month lag. So I don't even know 6 months worth, even though it's June. I only know 4 months worth. If those trends hold all the way through the year, what I'm seeing now, I'll be coming to you with good news. So yeah, staff never stops monitoring this, expenditures or revenues. So I will definitely come to you. If next year when you're doing the budget process, you'll be working on the 2014 budget, and definitely 2015 will be in play.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just thinking in 2013, I mean, we have 6 months before we start that budgeting process, and if there's things that we should be doing in the first 6 months or not doing as a result of what you're seeing, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that,
We will let you know.
We will, and keeping you informed and abreast of what we see pretty quickly is certainly part of our obligation
Sure.
to you.
And you can make it, as we've stated before, if you budget something, that doesn't mean you must spend it. If it doesn't look good, it's like, never mind, we don't want that, or no, we're not going to do this, or we're reducing, or we're taking out, or what. We can still make those adjustments. Budgeting is setting your maximum expenditure. Right, your not to exceed expenditure authority.
I guess another point, which is difficult, I understand for this council in particular, is looking at it from an historical perspective. When Chris raised the issue, I dug back into some old shelves and found a budget book from the 2007 going into 2008. And then we projected a $905,000 shortfall for 2008, and we projected a fund balance, general fund balance of 13% for 2012. So this year we're projecting a fund balance of 2012 of 30%. So we talked, I know that.
Well, your actual
Sometimes I'll-
fund balance for 2012 right now is 39.
Right, or
So,
39,
yeah.
So, year over year over year, staff says, I say, we budget conservatively, That's not hitting.
That's right.
When you take that trend of conservative revenue estimates and pessimistic expense estimates, and you expand that trend over a period of time, it becomes worse. It's like, it's like being 1 degree off on your golf shot at the tee. Makes a pretty big difference when you get close to the green. So it's that,
Compound.
and it's that, I guess, strategy towards budgeting that we have forever. I mean, since, Brian Kidney was the finance director, Todd Calico was our city administrator, and that was what we, the way we approached budgeting, and it's always served us well, and it's given us opportunity to have time to recover when we did have a very significant recession. So, I think that's the point we need to keep in mind as we go forward. There's nothing in here that says, oh my gosh, we need to do something drastic, either cut costs or increase revenues. That's not the case. I think, we just need to understand where we are, and we're using those funds for their intent. That's the capacitor, which keeps the voltage level as you go forward. So,
I guess what I would say to what you just said, and I think that I've had many conversations with Laura. I know she's keeping an eye on this stuff. We've talked about things like people that aren't paying their assessments, and I know some of that stuff exists. But you say in 2007, you're looking in 2008 with a $900,000 shortfall, and now we're sitting at 39% with any luck at the end of this year, which is great. But, wasn't 2008 about the time that we stopped providing raises? In 2010, we gutted community development. Steps were taken
absolutely.
to ensure that we protected the city's treasury. And
yeah, they were taken to adjust for the conditions of the times. Yeah, we weren't building anything, so the community development obviously was an area that was overstaffed. So that's really the strategy that went behind all that when we looked at what we were doing, and when a community like ours was on that growth curve, to have that, you know, it didn't taper. Would have been nice if it tapered, but it didn't. And, you know, it went from
Double digit.
significant to
Plummeted.
zero. And so, you know, we did have to take action, which we did. And so, obviously that held on. And when we talked about raises, we were very cautious about putting raises back into the budget. And, you know, I think that's the message and the way that staff recommends we proceed, and certainly the way that the community's been governed. So, you know, and that's the pattern and the strategy that you see in this as well. I mean, obviously you can't. I mean, we can't know what's going to happen tomorrow morning. So, you know, we just base it on what we see at the time. You pointed out Greece. I mean, that Europe could have a profound effect on this discussion.
Sure.
Absolutely.
No, and I realize that it's an ongoing process. I guess the thing that troubles me, and I did bother to look up, and you know, it can be a little hard to find exactly the kind of information you're looking for sometimes. But I went to the GFOA website, and they had a best practices, and they said, you know, 2 months, whether it's expenses or revenues, is the minimum, and that's 16.7%, which basically, you know, 15 and 16, that's the minimum. And I know, well, and maybe I'm misspeaking, but do we have a ordinance about what we maintain in our?
You have a financial policy.
Yeah, well, do we address
Out years.
in fund balance?
We address fund balance. Policy is 25%, but that's not a projected policy for 2 years out. But right now, you're above 25%.
Well,
That's our target.
And I guess what my question is that, and maybe I could have nailed Dottie Riley down about it or something, but, you know, at one point, you know, is it 25, 23, 21, 19, 17? When does that affect our bond rating? Because it would have affected what we would have been able to sell these bonds for.
You've mentioned the minimum at 2 months' worth, about 16.7%.
Sure.
The rating agencies would like to see around 25, if possible, pretty much. So that's kind of the target we kind of look at, as a 25% general fund reserve balance.
But you said they only look at current year.
Right.
Right.
What they want to know that you have a 5-year plan, or longer. Who knows why anything longer than that would be useful, but they want to know that you have a plan, and that you're monitoring, and that you're watching, and they do know that we have a plan, and we do monitor, and we do watch. And that's only one component of the rating. And I'm not saying it's an insignificant component, I'm just saying there's so many, and so many of them are beyond your control. National economy, regional economy. If Johnson County gets a downgrade from AAA, we're going to get a downgrade, and it wouldn't have anything to do with us. If Sprint leaves town, we might get a downgrade, and it doesn't have anything to do with us directly. There's a lot of components, and fund balance is one of them, but they will not be particularly interested in the 2015 fund balance until we're in 2014. They haven't even asked on the last few rating calls. They just want to know, do you have... Because we're not the only people in this situation, or only entity. They'll be looking at similarly situated rated cities in Kansas to see where we fall, and they'll look at national medians, and it won't just be your fund balance. It'll be all the things that I mentioned, population and how fast you're growing, and building permits and foreclosure rates, and all that stuff plays in. So I'm not saying you are not making a point. You are, but they're not going to care yet about that projected fund balance.
Well, yeah, and that's actually what I'm worried about. you know, 2015, shoot, I might not be sitting here anymore, but I don't know about anybody else that's going to be on the council in 2015, but I'd hate to see us in some kind of financial pickle, you know, at the end of,
We
at the end of my
have,
term.
we have plenty of time to deal with it, just so you can rest easy. And I would tell you, like I tell a lot of people, worrying about it will not change the reality of it. So there's no point in worrying about it at this point in time. We will monitor, we will keep you fully informed of any trends, any changes, anything that you need to be aware of in regards to the city's financial condition. You'll have plenty of advance notice. You have plenty of opportunity to exercise a variety of options to correct it if need be. I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I don't have a crystal ball either, and things do happen in this world that we cannot predict. But given all the conservative estimates on revenue, and I think the county is kind of making a push on some of the delinquencies, and as that resolves, that's going to have a serious impact on the bond and interest fund if they can start collecting some of those delinquencies on their schedule.
It won't take very many of them to make a big impact, because some of them were quite large, you know. Just a couple of properties being foreclosed on will take care of a whole lot of our problems.
Yes.
The transfers in on the second page of the general fund, where do most of those come from?
Well, let me make sure I'm looking in the right place. Transfers in. Are you talking about on the revenue summary?
Right. 992,000.
Right. If there's the page where it says general fund revenue summary at the top, if you go to the second page of that, they're listed, each individual one right there. On the bottom of the second page where it says electric fund, water fund, wastewater fund, other, there's a whole list of them, and then there are amounts that add up to 992,000.
So for instance, which on 391.96, it says TIF.
We take a 5% administrative fee from the TIF district.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what did I say, percent? 5,000. Take a $5,000 administrative fee.
And those numbers next to those funds, I tried to match them to the glossary, and I couldn't find anything that matched those numbers. Are they
Glossary.
in the back? You know, it's got all the transfers. I mean, there's
Right.
there's an electric fund transfers in and a water fund, but they're different numbers, and I don't see anything that says 078.
Oh, you know what, those first three are from a previous software, more than 10 years ago. But the titles are still the same. Electric fund is electric fund in the glossary. Water fund is water fund in the glossary. The numbers are incorrect, but they're just a carryover from an old software.
So is that 795 from the electric fund, is that amount that we previously called and then you corrected us was not a franchise fee? Is that amount?
It is a transfer from the electric fund.
And how do you gauge what that number is going to be? I mean, what is it based on?
There's an administrative component in it for HR work and...
Cost allocation.
Yeah, that's the way to put it, cost allocation. That's what it is. It's an estimate.
Right.
It's not a directly formulated, calculated. It's been living in there and projected for years and years and years, and I haven't seen any big reason to change it. It appears to be something that the electric fund is built in on their side as well.
So it's overhead?
Pretty
for
much.
supporting departments?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Not all of it. There's a component of that, and then there's a rule of guesstimate of percentage of sales. Because if we were being
if it was
If
KCP&L.
We would charge them.
We would charge them.
So it's the
5%, and so that's,
Well, assuming that we made an agreement for 5%, that's the phone, that's the,
I guess, remember when we talked about this and you said it wasn't
it's
not a franchise fee because we own the utility?
Right.
But my comment was, are we sure? I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out why then, and a couple of years ago, when the electric utility board wanted to increase the payment to Gardner, why would they? I mean, do they control that number, or do we?
No, they control that number.
They do?
All decisions regarding budget and rates and everything but for debt have been given to the electric utility board. So they haven't said, gosh, I'm not going to pay it. I mean, it's a working relationship because they're still a department of the city. They are not a separate entity. So it's a group work just like we do everything else in the budget.
yeah.
I guess surmised from that email conversation that we had that they gave it to us and because I remember I asked that question, are we sure that it actually covers what their costs are? I mean, if they can easily increase it for employee raises and things like that, then I guess it seems like it really came from them, not so much what our cost accounting said they owed us.
No, and we're not doing cost accounting. That's what I'm trying to say. This has just been a projection that has an inflationary factor on it. It's just been pulled across the spreadsheet for years on end on both sides, electric and general fund. And nobody has said that's right, that's wrong. There was a time when it was calculated, but I don't know how it was done. I wasn't a part of it. I don't know exactly what the calculations were, nor the formulas, and I haven't been able to find anything that tells me.
Right, but you said it was cost allocation, so I'm assuming that means...
We are not doing cost accounting.
Cost allocation means the HR services that are provided, the financial services that are provided are paid for by the utility. That's a separate amount.
And water. So it's
Right,
not-
water's doing it, right.
Yeah, it's not just electric. The reason the electric utility, the reason they offered that was because they were giving a raise. The general fund was not giving a raise. And so, in order to create some equity, they offered in October, November, I can't remember when it was.
Kind of late in the game.
To do that, and from a general fund perspective, we said no, because the council had approved a budget in August. In order for us to accept that and change that, we would have had to gone back and readjust it. So we said no thanks. But we also said at the time that if council wants to utilize the electric fund as a means of supporting the fund balance, a means of paying for capital needs. In other words, utilizing the electric fund as any company would an enterprise within their company, and take that profit or revenue and allocate it. We're certainly legally able to do that, but the philosophy at the time, and I mean, we're certainly welcome to adjust that policy. The philosophy at the time was to say, no, this is a standalone entity, should be managed as a standalone entity. If it was KCP&L, this is what we'd be getting approximately from them. I approached it from the standpoint of saying, well, if we truly want to manage these utilities as if they were private utilities, then we should estimate some level of property tax revenue that we would otherwise be gaining from that utility, and bring that back into the general fund as well. I mean, that's certainly a strategy that can be utilized, but when it was discussed in the past, it was viewed as, we're all paying the same.
Right.
I'm moving the money from my right pocket to my left pocket to make my left pocket
And you're
balance out.
impacting the same.
And you're impacting the same group
Right.
of folks,
Unless they spend the money on something that we wouldn't approve of, and then like raises, and then really that money's gone. See what I'm saying? I mean, And that's why I feel like I'm getting two different answers. I guess, do they tell us what this amount is?
No.
Or do we give them a bill? And if we give them a bill,
No,
is
that
it
either.
truly allocated by the cost
No.
that they use of city services?
No.
It's more or less calculated as or at one time, it was effectively a franchise fee of a certain percent. So I go back to my original question, which is, are we sure that that number covers their true expenses?
No, and we are not doing cost accounting to make sure.
Cost
because-
allocation, what's the difference, I guess?
Because
What's the
cost
difference in
accounting is a specialty that no one in this staff has. It would be a direct watch every single dollar and make sure that the electric utility was paying every single dollar of overhead and whatever else it takes to run that utility to be charged back. We're not doing that. It's an estimate. It's got some components in it that estimate HR's time and estimate the accounting division's time and.
But I guess you do it anyway for like risk services, right? I mean, that's how you allocate.
It's also an estimate.
And it-
Those are all estimates.
Yeah, that's allocations. Again, it's allocations plus what
It's
would
based
be
on the budget.
considered
amount.
What we do in the internal service funds is what you're talking about.
Right.
We have a budget that's an estimate of our expenditures, and we just merely divide that by 12 and transfer some over one piece every month, and at the end of the year, we true up on what we really spent.
Yeah, but this isn't
But this isn't the same thing,
the same
because we don't do a
thing, and
true
that-
up.
Yeah, and the Electric Utility Board has their own budget. This is
It
this is
has
what
this
they.
number in it.
It has this number in it, it has,
Yeah.
it's allocating this amount of money,
in their
and
budget.
this is,
Yeah.
they're allocating this amount for
Right.
expected franchise.
And I guess, if there was a desire for them to increase it, that's because the utility board is in charge of those things now, you would all have to work that out together. I mean. unless
Okay,
you-
next question on the general fund, the one with the chart, the organizational chart. Actually, you probably don't even need to look at that. I'm just curious, why did we change the Southwest Economic Development Corporation funding to the general fund instead of from the economic development?
It was just a recommendation, a consensus of the committee. The Economic Development Fund is also, if you want to keep it viable on out through the planning period, something needed to give there. And it used to be paid from the general fund up until those 2 years. It's been paid from the general fund in the past. It was moved to relieve the general fund over to the Economic Development Fund, and now it's been asked to be moved back, and that was just a consensus of the committee. I don't think there was a whole lot of, it was just to make the Economic Development Fund last longer.
But I mean, we had enough money, as I recall from last year, to take it out to 2017 before it was depleted, and I gotta believe there's still revenue coming in, right?
There is. It was started to be negative, and you don't show a negative fund balance in a 5-year planning period. That's all.
And the increase on the mayor and council budget, that's to account for the survey, is that right?
The 11,000, yeah, that every other year. Mm-hmm.
And then utility newsletters,
Mm-hmm.
looks like we print them 12 times a year, which
No, it's
every month.
Utility.
utility. Oh, yeah, I was thinking the wrong one.
What do we spend on that? I know it's just the cost of the paper and,
That one that goes in the utility bill,
right.
I think it's 5 cents. I think I had that. I think it was 5 cents, the insert.
And it goes out to 8,500 homes as well?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay. And,
That's in the utility billing fund, though.
And if you're looking for something, can I jump in?
yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm looking again at the multi-year. The expenditure total in 2011 was $8,000,005. Last year, the estimate was $9,232,000. The estimate at the end of the year is $9,274,000, and now we're up for 2013 to nearly $10 million. So it's nearly a $1.5 million expenditure total increase over the course of 2 budget cycles. An 8% increase over the previous year. which,
Without the debt service, it's 6. Without having to cover that debt service, it's a 6% increase.
okay.
I'm just
I-
saying,
yeah.
I happen to know that because I played with that the other day, that's all, I just.
I understand, I'm not
Yeah, okay.
trying to be argumentative about that.
Well, me neither, I'm just saying.
And
right.
I think you understand that, but yeah, that's, yeah, and then when we talked about, hey, 29 is a good number. You know, but that's down from 44% at the end of 2011. And then it's looking to drop another 12% over the next 2 budget years. I mean, you're talking about going from 44 to 17 in the course of 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015.
Again,
Is there
I
a compliment in there?
wouldn't put too much stock in
There
the
what?
14 and...
Compliment? I think it's a great testament to the staff.
Oh, I think the staff's doing a great job, and not just during the budget process,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but all year long.
Yeah, being great stewards of that budget.
Yeah, and yeah, we're talking about in 2011, I know that this budget figure, the revenue totals, I think, came in higher that year, the expenditure totals came in lower, the surplus wasn't anticipated in 2011. We're looking at doing much better in 2012. But I'm talking about eye on the future. And you know, the trend with the 8% increase in expenditures for this year.
But, and that
Yes,
8%
concern.
is driven predominantly by capital outlay. I mean, if you look at the other expenditures, they're virtually flat. So I'm assuming we're going to have discussions about these capital outlay as we go through and be able to make some determinations as to what we're going to do with it.
As we get into the individual budgets,
Right.
you'll see it all.
Right.
Is there an accounting for the election that's going to happen in 2013? There's a
You mean,
cost.
is there something budgeted for it?
Right.
No, sir.
There's a cost to it, though,
There
right?
is a cost, but that's, I've not traditionally been budgeted for. It runs in the 20s, 20-some thousand.
And what if there's a primary?
I would have to call the election office and ask them what they would charge.
Don't you think we ought to include that in the numbers? I mean, we know there's an election for certain. We know how much it costs per registered voter, right?
I would have to get it from you. I don't know. The election office,
I
I
mean,
suppose.
yeah,
would.
they'll tell
Sure.
us. And then, I mean, we want to establish a worst-case scenario, right?
$20,000 is
Pretty small potatoes.
immaterial.
$10 million.
It's
to-
really
to
immaterial.
this particular, as a percentage of the general fund, it won't move the bottom line.
Well, true, but we put the survey in there, and it was only 11.
Well, that's because, okay, well,
I mean,
I can try to get a number, I guess, from the,
Suppose.
if council
You
so
know,
directs.
Done it,
And I don't
been able to
know,
manage in
well, I mean,
It's easily-
50 some odd years, so.
that's an item that's certain to be a cost, so I wouldn't know why we wouldn't want to put it in. I mean, I think
good.
they're... And then,
It didn't seem to impact us in 2011. That's the best looking column on the page.
2010, I think the recall amount came out of the mayor's fund, so, and it was not budgeted either.
No. Well, that was also unanticipated.
Yeah, I don't think we can anticipate recalls.
Under community development, the 2012 budget was 81.7, and the 2013 is 152.5, which is a $70,800 difference.
50,000 of that was for the seasonal help, or the temporary help, or whatever you want to call that.
And what will they do again? What is, kind of,
They will help the 2 people that we have to do all the inspections for buildings as well as property code violations, as well as help the planning department with...
So are they independent contractors, or they're going to be employees?
Likely, they will not be employees. They are not anticipated to be employees. They're more likely to be independent contractors paid on an hourly basis with no benefits.
Which is how it's budgeted here in that line. Seasonal is seasonal/temporary. It doesn't include benefits.
Then how about the amount for the community development director? Is that in here?
No, because it's all in the general fund, and that, as Mr. Press said, it can be taken care of between the savings between administration and community development and whatever else is involved. They're all general funds, so it's all...
It's all within the same
Yeah,
fund.
it's
We
all
can
within the
adjust
same
the
fund.
particular line item if we need to, if we go forward with that program.
But you do show that FTE, right?
There is no
There's no
additional,
change.
we show the
Yeah, you-
We
person,
moved it over
Right.
to...
we show the transfer of the individual, yes.
Administration.
Uh-huh.
So on that $50,000 seasonal, I'm assuming that, is that something that would come before council, I guess is the question?
We would certainly talk to you before we made any move in that regard. We would show you the statistical evidence and the complaints that you receive from people who don't get called back because everybody we have is out doing inspections and they can't be here to answer the phone, and they can't be in 2 or 3 or 5 places at the same time. So, yeah, we will certainly let you know about the activity levels and the need for additional personnel, so the people here can take care of business, and then we can have certain inspectors go out so they don't have to go out and do every inspection on a new construction project or on a property code complaint.
On the mowing special assessments, what do we charge for that?
Whatever we have to pay is what is assessed to the property for the mowing.
So it's just a pass-through?
It is a pass-through.
But we have to show it in the budget.
Right, I mean, we have to pay it. It goes out of city funds,
No, I understand.
and it goes on their property tax bill, and it comes back into the general fund when we get our property tax revenues.
So can I ask a question about that? And I know this is probably minute, I'm assuming, but, so there's costs that the city has contacting the people, trying to get them to do it before we actually move forward. Is that cost included?
I don't think so. I think it's just for the mowing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Olathe charges like $125 an hour I just got a bill on a real estate transaction. I think they mowed 3 times and there was over $300 worth of
I
mowing
believe that
charges. So, I mean, I think that they mark it up.
they could be.
Most companies would if they were gonna, subcontract it out.
Yeah, I don't bill those, so I can't say I've ever seen one go out, but I'm 99.99% sure it is just for the mowing recovery itself.
It is. And that's a policy decision we could make. I mean, if you all think that that would be something we want to do. Now, if we have a policy, we can't differentiate between the nameless, faceless, out-of-town developer
And
and...
grandma. Grandma whose mower doesn't work.
Yeah, so I mean, it's policy. So, I mean, we can, that's why we've always taken that cost approach. It's what it costs the city to do it, so this is what we're gonna do. But yeah, I mean, we certainly, we can add a premium to it.
So could we look at the breakdown of how many of those are actually developed? I mean, what is the, I guess, status of...
Citizen versus...
Right.
Undeveloped property kind of thing. Now, some of our undeveloped properties, Jim's not here, but we only require a...
6-foot right-of-way?
Yeah, an outer path that's cut.
Why is that?
I don't know, it's,
I mean, a whole lot doesn't have to be cleared?
If it's over 10 acres, no.
Right.
But that wouldn't be a big revenue for us anyway.
No, it's not
Not a revenue.
It's not a revenue producer, it's just an offset to our
Yeah,
costs.
offset to a cost, yeah.
But on the
But
other hand...
the rate could also be a deterrent.
Right, exactly. If people had to pay the true costs instead of just look at it as, well, I don't have to call the guy down the street this week because the city did it for me, then they probably wouldn't do it again. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you wouldn't have to manage it as much and spend so much employee time.
Perhaps, but a lot of these are undeveloped properties that we have to go back to the owner that perhaps is not a resident and have them take care of it. So,
Yeah, I mean, philosophically, if you want to do it, we can,
I think we should.
I agree.
so how much?
let's talk about this at a future date, 'cause, so let's take care of the business we have in front of us tonight. We can talk about that at a
And we're
future
having
date.
a community development director soon, get their input once they get here.
So,
But
do
yeah, I'm on board with you and Larry.
Okay, great.
Under the mayor and council budget, the dues and subscriptions, comes to 11,400. What is that?
hold on. For 2013, you said it was 11,400?
Right.
It's primarily $7,800 to the League of Kansas Municipalities dues, and there's $3,300 for Mid-America Regional Council. And then there's some little piddling, 25 here and 25 there, and
Money well spent.
Then under the glossary where it talks about the motor vehicle tax, I wrote, what does this mean? I'm not sure that I understand what.
What does that mean?
Distribute all applicable taxing subdivisions. Oh yeah, here's the part I understand. In proportion to the respective shares of the prior year's total levy rate within the tax levy unit in which the vehicle is located. What does that mean?
so, well, I'm not, without knowing completely, in other words, it's saying there is a formula that the county follows because the county assesses and collects this, and they distribute it based on some kind of formula in the tax levy unit. In other words, a car in Gardner Township is not the same amount of tax levy as a car in the city of Gardner or a car in McCamish Township, so they've got all that information, and they figure out how much the city gets versus unincorporated Johnson County gets versus whatever. And it's all a calculation that the county's taking care of.
And then the next page talks about the transient guest tax,
Mhm.
which says it's 4%,
That's incorrect, it's 6.
and it's Charter Ordinance 18, right?
I have to admit, I have paid zero attention to the glossary, so if it was wrong this year, it was probably wrong last year too, because I gave it zero attention. But it is 6%, and I probably go back and find out which Twitter ordinance it is, but that was adjusted. I know it was 6%.
Then the intergovernmental revenue on 2 pages beyond that talks about a portion of the state's special city and county highway fund. It receives a percentage of the state's motor fuel tax collections and property taxes on motor carriers. How's that calculated? Is that by truck tax or by facility
I
tax?
do not know. That is a fuel tax, and that comes
And
from
a
the
property
state.
tax, though.
No, it's gas tax.
I guess one question, is there something, could we maybe
Any
get
more
to, I know,
questions,
but could we get
you
to,
have?
like, the business at hand? And if you have questions like we said last week and the week before, if you could get those to staff before the meeting, then
We'd be prepared to answer
would
them.
have the opportunity to be prepared to answer, much like Chris's question regarding the fund balance. Gave Mike and Laura an opportunity to research that because they received that question on Wednesday
Well, and
last week. So, I think in the interest of everyone in this room, specific questions regarding definitions and where they come from, and many of them from statute, if you could get those to Laura, we can get them out to whomever can answer them, but I think we really ought to get down to the funds tonight that we need to talk about so that we can have, develop any questions for next week's discussion, if council would be so inclined.
No, I'm ready to move on. Maybe after work, we're talking with folks this evening, and maybe Wednesday. I mean, I'd
Right.
kind of like to revisit our funds available and our shortfall as a matter of policy as opposed to, Mike Kress said at the last meeting about this, that this is the spending policy document that the city and we as a governing body put together every year. And, yeah, the numbers are, and I'm glad that you guys have comfort with it, and that makes me feel a little bit better, because I trust you. But yeah, when I see the figures, you know, it gives me a little.
Well, I get, okay.
Before I go
I'm
in-
ready to move on.
Well, before we move on, I did have a note that I'm sure you'll be okay with this, but all things that were listed for the July 11th work session, like there's like parks funds and some other funds, that's going to be like a 15-minute presentation because there's nothing to talk about.
Right.
So I would humbly suggest we move that to the end of meeting on July 2nd, and that means we won't be meeting on July 11th, if you guys are all okay with that. There's nothing to talk about unless you have questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's,
You'll already be here, and
right.
I think we can accommodate that on one night, that we don't need to have
Very
that next.
small,
there's just nothing to say.
Pretty incidental.
right.
Some of those funds don't even have anything in them.
With, from the standpoint of Wednesday night, we want to talk about policy and philosophy regarding fund balance. I mean, you want to talk about.
And shortfalls.
Right.
What more
I mean,
can I
that's
give you?
some part of the fund balance. You know, I guess, are you wanting to talk about ways to make it be 20, make it be 25, make it be, you know?
You know, and
I mean, if you look at the pie chart regarding what our expenditures are, it's fairly obvious that there's not a whole lot of room other than in operating expense to reduce that, which is principally personnel.
well, as Christina, as Councilmember Harrison just mentioned, you know, the biggest part of the shortfall this year is in capital outlay.
Right.
$438,000. You know, yes, there is some in operations, but there's a big chunk in capital outlay compared to previous years.
And we'll be talking about some of those as we get into the individual budgets.
And I'm
Okay.
I'm
'Cause I
ready
mean,
to
that's the,
move on.
you know, I guess that's the question, is where do you want to address that?
Maybe we should walk through the budgets, and then we can go back and revisit that question on Wednesday.
Very good.
That'd be great.
Okay.
All right.
Chief, I think you're up.
Are you all comfortable with me speaking from here, or would you rather me be up at the podium? Can you all hear me back there?
Yes, sir.
Generally speaking, our budget has followed about the same philosophy as you all have expressed tonight. We're generally very conservative at best. We well recognize that while economics may be a little bit better, not a great deal has changed from last year to this year. Therefore, your police department budget has not changed very much from last year to this year. I would be happy to discuss it with you, but as I said, there's no new programs, no new personnel. There are some items in capital outlay that you brought up there that you might have individual questions about. I think there's one overhead light bar. I think there's 4 vehicles budgeted for replacement. However, my budgeting philosophy generally, as much as Mr. Press and Laura has spoke to you, because it's in the budget doesn't mean that it's approved. It means that we then come back and ask you for permission to spend it. Or we make a decision that perhaps we don't need something as badly as we thought, so therefore the money stays there. We generally like to turn back some percentage of money that we think we can. So just because something's listed in there at some number, that's the high number. Captain Moore serves as our budget officer and spends a considerable amount of time on budget payments, things of that nature. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think we're at about somewhere 3% higher this year than we were last. And certainly I'd be happy to discuss any of what you have in front of you with you.
So, Chief, on,
Yes, sir.
on animal control, we spend $150,000, or we're expected to spend almost $151,000. But the revenue coming in is, again, as you know, from last year, animal licenses in impoundment, 10,500. Any plans to narrow that gap so that the people that use the services, any...
We try to, sir. It's difficult process because animal control is one of those things that, again, you have to remember in our business, we're a 24-hour day operation. We have an animal control officer. So that means that when it goes past the 8 hours that he works, then it's patrol cars responding to whose ever request. And then they try to hunt down the animal that may be loose, or if they are lucky enough to find it, then to try to determine whether it was tagged or not, which is a check with clericals in the daytime. Captain Moore supervises that activity. We have talked about that in the past. I think we have raised the numbers somewhat better than we used to be able to do in terms of trying to maintain that balance between being a nice place to live and not being afraid of the animal control unit, and at the same time trying to, those folks who do not follow the rules very well end up in municipal court facing a judge for no licenses or allowing their animals to run loose or those kind of things. As perhaps was brought up by Laura earlier, they're tough balances because they're not all that one person you may know of that lets a dog run loose. Sometimes it's an old lady whose dog runs out the front door and she can't catch it. And she has no choice but to call us. And, oh, gee, I was going to get a license if I could just get my son to get out here from Kansas City to pay for the license. So sometimes we do try to work with people to strike a balance, but the animal control officer is reasonably effective at his job, does a good job, and I wish it could be a little more offsetting, but generally speaking, whether it's police operations or those kinds of things, unfortunately, we're not revenuers. And I know that, again, you talked about philosophy, but in the past, sometimes particular city administrators would like to have more traffic tickets issued or things of that nature. We don't operate in that fashion. The law is broken, we assess what needs to be done to enforce it, and that's what we do. I wish that animal control could be a little more balanced. Again, the uncontrolling factor that we have is the veterinarian services. Obviously, we're pretty much at a one-bidder operation these days. While I think they've been fair, there certainly could come a time where their contractual price will be perhaps too high, and then other decisions will have to be made.
Is there no way, though, that we can, I know we talked about this before, but it just seems like it's a problem that could be solved some way, some creative way, but just attach a bill to everyone's utility bill and have them, sign an affidavit saying they either have, a number of pets that are fixed or not fixed, and either bill them for that amount, or they sign it and we take it off their bill. It just seems like that's one of those problems that, it's, last time I checked, there was like 280 some odd people this time last year that paid for licenses, and it seems pretty much voluntary, really. So.
Well, it's only voluntary unless your pet is caught, and then it becomes involuntary at that point.
There's several cities have dropped the pet license entirely because it's really very, very difficult to enforce unless the animal is caught loose.
So if an animal's caught and you take it to the shelter, does the owner have to pay the cost?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so the only time we pay those costs is if they don't pick up the animal, obviously.
Well,
If nobody claims the
If
animal.
nobody claims it.
that would be correct, but you have to remember the policy changed several years ago. You're not talking about just dogs, you're talking about dogs and cats. I don't know how many of you have ever chased a cat, but, or how many people there declared ownership of a cat, but I think Captain Moore will tell you that on the cat side of it, that's a very slim prospect.
There are no cat owners in Gardner.
That's right, they own you.
Now, the reason for me, and I'm not trying to be a funny man with you, but we face the same problem. We don't like the numbers any better than Mr. Fodovich does. Jim and I have worked together for many years, and we've talked about it for many years. But the problem is the felines. Because once you pick those up, you as a city are now paying. There is 2% of the time somebody's going to walk into that veterinarian and say, oh, that's my cat. So you're going to have a euthanasia bill, or hopefully there's an adoption, but you're going to have approximately a 3-day bill. So that's where some of your, so to speak, hidden costs come in that don't let you just kind of balance the numbers like you kind of like to. Now, as far as your suggestion about maybe how to go about it, there's several areas of the law I wish we had that ability to get affidavits to make sure they're not doing what they're doing. But I don't know anybody who want to live here under those circumstances. But I share your concern.
It's not that difficult. You either, if you say that you don't have any pets and then one gets picked up, well, then the owner gets fined. But if you acknowledge that you do, the problem here is that, when you send a bill, people will pay it. But if you don't send a bill, then people forget, honestly. And
What kind of a bill would we send them?
well, if they have 4 dogs and they're not
How
spayed
would
or
we know
neutered,
that they have 4 dogs?
well, they're allowed to have 4 pets, or 2 dogs, 2 cats. They can have by ordinance 4 pets.
Correct.
So if you had a document that basically charged everybody for 4 pets, and they checked the box and said, no, I've only have 2, and they're both spayed or neutered, then.
But it'd certainly be up to the council if they'd wish to pass some kind of a
Has anybody seen any
ordinance
solution?
like that.
It seems like a lot of money that should be allocated to those who caused the problem, and.
Well, I don't know that it sounds like more money, but it doesn't sound like a lot of money.
We get $10,000 and like Christie said, the impoundments, they may pay when they claim the animal, but still, it's only to the tune, including the licenses, of $10,500.
Yeah, but if they're not gonna pick up their dog, they're probably not gonna license it.
Yeah, they're not gonna check the box.
I think there's tons of people that would, own up to their pet, but under the current circumstances, it's purely voluntary.
Perhaps we could do a little bit of research and find out if any other communities have some innovative solutions to this. I haven't read of any, I haven't heard of any, but we could sure do some research and try to find out if there's any precedent somewhere.
All right.
Maybe some of the cities that are a little more densely populated.
Most of them have dropped licensing animals just because it doesn't work.
Okay.
So one thing I would ask is maybe a solution, and I don't even know if we want to go here, but, you know, I get a nice little note on my door if the meter reader can't read my water meter because the dogs are out there. I mean, I don't know if there's any way for us to collaborate that type
Good idea.
of information. I don't know. Or if we even want, I don't know if
It's
it's
on an incident basis. I'm not sure it'd be worth the administrative cost to get that up and running for the incidental times where that happens.
I mean, I think we send out, don't we send out notices for the backflow testing to people that don't even, I mean, I know neighbors that have said, what's this reminder that I got about my backflow testing device? I haven't, you know, I don't have a sprinkler or a pool. So I'm assuming that, do we send those out to everybody, or do they,
We send them out to anyone we know that has a backflow.
well, that includes probably finished basement, or
That
what
I
the,
don't know if we get into that detail. If we have good information that they have a sprinkler system, we send them one. It's basically driven by sprinkler systems known or reported.
Mr. Vodovich, Captain Moore reminds me, 3 years ago, we did send out a postcard to everybody that we had listed that lived in the city of Garden, setting out the dates on the licensing of animals and where to go do that at, how much it costs.
right,
We have, or through the city, you all have, kept that number reasonably low in order to encourage people to get their animals licensed. I think it's, 3 and 6, 4 and 8.
I think it's 3.
But it's pretty nominal. And we usually get a pretty good flow of people who come in during those times. And then, as I say, but we have sent those out for, I think we did it for almost 3 years, almost at least once a year on the utility news or through the city newsletter. There's comments made about licensing of animals and pets and getting their shots and, you know, certainly all those things, concerns about dog bites. So I think we both share the same concern.
maybe we could put in, if whatever newsletter, a reminder of what the costs are if you don't have one. I mean, if the dog gets picked up, or, because what are the costs? I don't know. By the way, I need to write you a check for one dog. So what are the costs for, if you,
For the impoundment fees,
right, or,
first time's 25, the second time's 50. I believe the third time and all subsequent 75.
that's the,
Plus the $25 a day at the animal hospital.
And to be honest, sometimes in this economy, we know people have just walked away from it. I mean, they just,
right.
whether they're telling the truth or not, they say they can't afford to pay it.
Chief, I have a question. If you look at your customer survey results, the one area that I guess is lower, and I don't know if this is bad or good, is animal control. Have you looked, I mean, do you have any indication? I can hypothesize that people, we probably would feel we need more, but I don't know if that's really the case. Any thoughts or insight into that?
You know, I don't have any real insight or information to that. From what I can tell, it's one of those situations where I think it's fashionable to not like the dog catcher. People have had that built into them for many, many years. You know, they get Lulu's pet, and they do this, and they do that, even though they are trying to do a good job and serve the public well. I know a number of people who have had interaction with our ACO, and they have raved about his abilities of dealing with them and trying to be helpful. Depending on who gets surveyed, though, if they probably don't have near the information that you do. They probably assume that animal control is out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would suspect at 3 o'clock in the morning a dog barking, that patrol officer's probably not near as nice as Jason would be if it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon and he was coming out to talk to you about a dog problem. And we do interplay between the officers and the ACO and the reports and those kind of things. But I'm just saying, if you're the one that has been awoken, or maybe somebody had what somebody thought were pit bulls, and they didn't think the city operated quickly enough, or they didn't think something, if that's one of those persons that gets a call, they're probably not going to be extremely satisfied. They may be just satisfied, or they may think we could do better.
Okay.
Just a guess, so I have no evidence to base that.
And I can't remember what it was, but it did jump.
It went back
Posi-
down.
Yeah, it jumped positively after we brought animal control on as a full.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Day. There was significant.
You're
change.
correct.
So we're, we're a 2% differential from 2009, 1% from 2007, so it really is within the statistic. It's probably within the error, I'm guessing. The one thing you brought up about dog barking, I mean, that's the one we don't have is a noise ordinance related to animals. I know we've really talked about it. It's difficult to enforce.
Well,
someone going.
It is contained in the ordinances in the nuisance areas.
Right. But it's
And
very.
it doesn't specifically just talk about a dog barking, but it's
It's
like
generic nuisance.
yeah. And so it's enforceable, and it does get enforced. Unfortunately, as council's aware, sometimes people are less interested in helping themselves than wanting someone else to help them.
Right.
So when you ask them to sign a complaint, they sometimes do not want to do that. So they would like the police to just do it for them. Well, we can't do that by law. Now, if the dog is barking or whatever in the presence of the officer, then at a stretch, the officer can go ahead and take some actions, and they do on a regular basis.
I always thought that dog catcher was an elected position, but I'd kind of like to shift gears for a second.
Sure.
I saw in city administrator's weekly update, are we sending somebody off to get certified as a truck inspector?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When is that going to happen?
I believe the class is scheduled for the first part of August.
Okay.
It's at the Highway Patrol Academy at Salina. It's a 2-week course. And we received a position through KHP, so there'll be no cost to the city at all.
Awesome. Couldn't have got 2 of those for no cost for 2.
Well, so it's next year.
All right. But that's, if I understand correctly, truck stops, commercial vehicle stops, and I realize you guys are law enforcement people. You're not trying to generate revenue, but...
We're all generalists in all of it, but with the intermodal coming in and the amount of truck traffic that's going on and those kind of things, probably what you'll see for the future is you may see some additional ordinances come in front of you that are more specifically aimed towards trucks, perhaps in weights and things of that nature, which we will ask this officer that gets trained as well as the highway patrol to assist us on that. We can enforce the law at all 3 levels, local, state, and federal. But the rest of them all kind of work themselves down. But at this point, we would not have the expertise we can stop trucks for violations of the traffic laws.
Right.
Whether their brakes are working correctly or their tread depth is at some level that's unsafe or those kinds of things. That was the intent of getting this officer certified as a commercial vehicle inspector, but he'll be working in Gardner, not outside the city.
Sure.
And plus,